Hey everyone, welcome to an emergency episode of the Brian and Hsu Ken show. We decided to do this because everybody is talking about what's happening at OpenAI and with Sam Altman and all of that kind of stuff. And Brian and I have been, our tweets and WhatsApp groups have been blown up by this. And so we thought it might be kind of interesting to just like hop on and kind of like talk a little bit about kind of like what we think and share context for people who maybe aren't as close to San Francisco about it. Before we kind of hop into that, maybe I'll do a recap of like the timeline. So for everybody that's watching this now, I don't know when this is going to get up, but we are recording this on Tuesday, November 21st at 8:40 a.m. Singapore. And then what time is it in San Francisco, Bima?
4:40 p.m. Monday.
Okay, 4:40 p.m. Monday. Quick recap of what has happened in case people haven't been following it as closely in Brian and I circle. It's basically impossible to not follow it, but quick recap here. On Thursday, Sam Altman was fired at OpenAI. So I just took this off of a TechCrunch article. So Thursday, Sam was fired. On Friday, Sam's firing was made public, I think, in a tweet. Brockman, who was also on the board, was removed from the board, and then a bunch of senior OpenAI researchers resigned. So that happened on Friday. On Saturday, investors were pushing for Altman to return, and I think the board started agreeing to kind of reverse course. On Sunday, the board negotiations hit a snag, and then kind of like out of the blue, it seemed like Sam Altman was then out and Emmett Shear was in. And then, Brian, it is Monday for you over in San Francisco. It seems like Sam Altman is joining Microsoft. And Ilya posted this post just like recently when I woke up that he kind of regrets putting this whole thing in motion. 500 of the 770 employees at OpenAI are threatening to leave. And actually, in like the last kind of like 2 hours or something, it seems like Sam Altman joining Microsoft is not a done deal. Him and Brockman are considering a return, which I don't know how that's possible since Emmett is kind of now there. But if they do return, I think it's like the board has to leave and they have to change a bunch of governance stuff. So that's the world that we currently live in right now as we are recording this. The Ilya,
Again, I saw 700 out of 770.
700. Okay.
Yeah. It's
So
like
basically, the entire company is threatening
the
to
entire
leave.
company.
The entire company is threatening to leave. But Emmett is the interim CEO. By the way, I think it's really interesting that they made him interim CEO, not like CEO. But apparently, none of this is a done deal, and this is very fluid. So everything we talk about could change in the next 12 hours by the time you read this. But that's the world we live in right now. Emmett is the interim CEO. Sam and Brockman might join Microsoft, but there's talk about returning. The people who set this thing in motion seem like they are kind of like waffling back and forth. Okay, Brian, before we kind of hop into lots of takes about kind of like what we think here.
Oh, fine. Go. I had a take, but you should go.
Okay. I just wanted to kind of share with people because I think one thing and look, predominantly the people who are kind of watching this are in Southeast Asia or at least outside of San Francisco. Maybe let's talk a little bit about kind of what the experience was like kind of like over the weekend. You and I are both in lots of like WhatsApp groups and text message threads and private Slacks and all of that stuff. Not with any of the people who are kind of on here. So we should say we have no insider information. We don't know anything about what's kind of like going on, but we have lots of friends with kind of people that are going on and people kind of like, and so, yeah, maybe I can share first about kind of what the experience was like. It's weird being on a different time zone here because like, I just woke up to just like an insane amount of like messages, and it was kind of like one of those things where you see the notifications before you know what's going on and you're like, just like catching up. But I remember there was one WhatsApp group that I was in and like we were talking about something else and somebody like asked me a question and then I like woke up and there was like 150 messages and I was like, I guess I don't need to answer the question anymore because like nobody cares about anything else that was happening at that point. And so I feel like, the same thing happened with the Silicon Valley Bank thing, but like all of the groups just get blown up. Everybody's trying to figure out what's happening. People are like throwing takes left and right. You're like posting links places. people are citing unnamed sources. They're like, oh, I have a friend at OpenAI and here's what's happening. And you're like, you don't know what to kind of believe. And so I think that's kind of the experience that like I was having that maybe kind of like, people who are just kind of reading the news are like not happening. Brian, your experience kind of like any different? You're actually kind of in the US,
Yeah, no, exactly the same. Other than while you're sleeping and activities happening, I'm actually following activity, and
Mm,
so I think it's that. And then I think the other the other thing that happens in the valley is all your friends, all your friends at OpenAI, right? So you're
yeah,
immediately like
yeah,
paying them like what happened, and then
yeah,
they're
yeah.
responding. They're like, we don't really know, and so it's like absolute chaos is basically what ensues, and
I,
zero
I
productivity.
I think chaos is the right way to kind of like describe it. It maybe is like I think most people are consuming the news through like what is being written about on like TechCrunch or what the information or whatever that's kind of like going on. But I feel like you and I sometimes we get the information kind of like it's not firsthand, but we're like front lines. So I feel like the people at TechCrunch and the information are like getting information the same way that we're getting information, where like they're just like talking to people and hearing stuff. Um, and then you're all kind of digesting it in real time. This is also kind of one of these times where I feel like Twitter is by far the best place to get kind of breaking tech news because I feel like it has the most takes, it has the most relevant people on board, and like all of that kind of stuff. And so I feel like most of my consumption of this is just like on Twitter and kind of like on Twitter in these groups, taking kind of like takes of stuff. But it kind of feels like the whole tech world just like paused to like
Stopped. Yeah.
figure out what's happening here. Like, I mean, there's you and I are like in these threads with like, I don't know, they're like founders of pretty big companies and stuff. And I feel like they're just like in here debating other people in these WhatsApp threads and stuff. So um, it's entertaining to kind of like say the least, but it's like fire hose of just like information, I feel like. So you're probably getting it in real time, but I'm like waking up to just like tons of
Yeah.
messages and stuff. So
This is random, but the most entertaining parts are actually the first day,
yeah,
right? Where there's like Sam is fine and there's like zero information. Everyone's like, oh, what happened? And all these conspiracy theories come out. And so, yeah, it's
which
great.
is great. We'll have a section on here. We took some of the conspiracy theories, and we have no idea if any of them are true. But Brian and I will just talk about them. Okay, maybe move on kind of to the next part here. This is a really strange story for a lot of reasons. Just to kind of encapsulate for people like how strange this is, OpenAI may be the most important tech company right now, Bima. Would you kind of argue with that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So it's happening to maybe the most important tech company right now. It has this like weird board structure, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But basically, it's like there's a bunch of different entities. There's like a really good graphic on it. We'll put it in kind of the show notes and stuff. But like there's like a bunch of different entities. OpenAI started out as a nonprofit. Now it's for profit. And so it just has this weird board structure, which allowed a very small group of people to kind of unilaterally make a decision. Like, for example, without Microsoft, who invested like $11 billion into the company. And so it's like a small kind of board structure that was able to kind of do this. And then it seems like the board was like not aligned with kind of investors, not aligned with employees, and a lot of this kind of stuff. And so it's kind of just chaos. And so it's just this
Uh,
like really strange story. Do you want to
Second,
add
I
something?
also want to add the board structure is new.
Oh,
So I remember, what was it like 4 or 5 years ago when they
yeah,
put this board structure together, right? Because OpenAI was entirely nonprofit, and they were
yeah,
like, "Oh, we're going to start doing some profit stuff." Um, People thought it was strange then.
yeah.
And so I think what's interesting on the board structure is it hasn't been well tested. And so this is kind of like a interesting result from kind of like what happens from it. But yeah, I'm staring at it right now and I don't even know who controls what and who owns what and who has votes and who doesn't. So yeah.
Yeah, and maybe let's just like hop into that part a little bit because I think we can provide you we can mainly you can provide a fair bit of context into like board structures, what's kind of typical, why this isn't how board works. For people that are on here, and Brian, you can talk about this. Like you started a company called Divvy Homes. It's a pretty large company, and so you guys have I think a more traditional kind of like board structure and all this kind of stuff. So maybe talk a little bit about like how this typically would have kind of like gone down. I mean, removing kind of CEOs is a thing a board does, but maybe kind of talk a little bit about kind of like what struck you as strange about how the board handled this relative to kind of
Yeah.
maybe how your board would have handled it and that kind of stuff. And are you on the board at
Yep.
DB? You're on the board.
Yep.
Okay.
Um, Maybe I'll start with like boards aren't that difficult to understand. It's actually super simple, right? So there's people on the board. Their job is to make sure that the company is kind of like working on the right things for the mission vision of the company. Typically, what happens is there's a representative for kind of like every stage of the company. There's a Series A rep, right? Series B rep. There's a
And
rep
these are
for
investors.
common, and typically they're investors. Sometimes you'll add kind of like an independent board member. All of them typically have votes. There's I mean the I want to say probably like 90% of companies it's like 1 to 1. Sometimes
Yeah.
there's super votes, but anyway, people have votes. And one of the functions of the board is to remove the CEO. You typically the standard is majority vote, though sometimes like your bylaws have kind of like different things. And so all in all, it's kind of like not that strange. It acts the way that kind of like boards I think should act. Um, I think what was interesting about how this played out was it was just very poorly planned,
Mm.
right? Like in any situation, I think for a board, you would have talked to everybody. You would have talked to your everyone who's owning a large portion of the company, Microsoft in this case. You would have talked to the lieutenants at the like Sam's like directs. You would have talked you the next CEO should know they should have been the next CEO, but it wasn't the case. Now there's like two CEOs, and so like the thing here was just like it was one of the most poor kind of like planning situations.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't I feel like it wasn't kind of like it was more a function of um the board not thinking through all the implications of their decisions rather than a structural kind of like issue with how it was set up.
And Brian, I don't know how much you can kind of talk about your board. How many people are in your board?
So it's just three.
Oh, three people on your board.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so they had kind of like four, and that's the thing that struck me the most about this too, right? Is that I feel like a lot of times the board of directors is there almost precisely to like again to be against this level, this kind of like behavior. Like I feel like the board oftentimes is like the adults in the room, and if anything rash is going to happen, they're like, wait, we got to like think this through. Like I almost feel like a lot of times boards act to kind of like slow the company down and make sure they're kind of like thinking about stuff and kind of like governance and all of these kinds of things. Is that fair? Is that how you kind of think about boards?
I definitely think governance, but I wouldn't say they're there to slow the company
Mm,
down. Like their responsibility is to make sure things are thought through
yeah, yeah,
and considered. And a lot of times they're voting on things that are like material to the direction of the company, right? Like, should we take on more money? Should
yeah,
we not take on? Should we be in debt? Should we work with this partner? Should we fire the CEO? Right? Like things that are kind of like will fundamentally change the company. Uh, they sometimes speed up companies like we're
yeah,
not going to do this project, right, et
yeah.
cetera. And so I don't think it's slowing down, but they certainly should be thinking deeply about
Yeah, and maybe
yeah
I guess what I mean by slowing down is make sure that the company's not acting too like
rash.
reactionary. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're too
yeah,
rash, right? And so it's kind of like,
yeah,
hey, if the company is thinking about doing something rashly, I feel like the board is like a lot of the purpose of that is to like be like, whoa, wait, really, we're
yeah,
gonna do this? Like, have we thought this through? And that's what's so weird about what's happened here is that like the board kind of was like the person. It seems like the entity that kind of acted rashly,
yeah,
which kind of seems counter to kind of like what boards typically are trying to do. Um,
yeah. This again could be a symptom of this like nonprofit thing. So I don't know if I read it correctly, but none of the board members actually had a stake in the company.
huh.
And so the fundamental I could be wrong on this, right?
Yeah.
But like from all my like from all my reading, like the fundamental thing that that board was supposed to do was make sure that they were working towards the mission of building AGI as a nonprofit. And I think there was a lot of kind of like clash, right? Between, or I think part of the clash was Sam was kind of like very enterprising and worked very hard to make sure that the tool got into people's hands. They were making money. You get like subscription payments, et cetera, et cetera. And it was different than kind of like the direction the nonprofit board wanted to take it.
Yeah, and for context for people, OpenAI was started as a nonprofit, and like Elon was kind of involved in all that stuff. And the whole reason it was called OpenAI was because it was supposed to be open sourced and kind of like AI for humanity and all that kind of stuff. And then Elon left. I think it seems like over a clash over this, and then they took it kind of like private, and now it's like not a nonprofit, but it has some of the structure of kind of a nonprofit, and like those two things are at odds. And so I think maybe structurally it was just in this awkward place because they started out as a nonprofit and then they were like for profit, and then I don't know, they have this kind of like Frankenstein kind of like thing. And so maybe there was some people that are like hungover from like people that were still kind of thinking more of a nonprofit, and they're kind of like, this is the like bisection of kind of the people who did or did not. um I still think I still think the board thing is just like so weird because I mean the people on the board are like, I mean, they're like obviously kind of like smart people and that kind of stuff. And so for them to act so rashly, and by the way, nobody knows what happened, right? And so I think that's so interesting that like we're all kind of like seeing the like byproduct or the like output of like something that happened, but nobody knows what happened, right? And we'll get to the conspiracy theory part. But for them to act this rashly, it kind of makes you think that like something really bad must have happened because they clearly kind of didn't have that much of a plan and that kind of stuff, right? Typically, if you're going to move on from a CEO, it's like, okay, I'm guessing, Brian, it's like you have a conversation with the CEO. You're like talking about kind of like changes you would like to be made. Okay,
yeah.
it doesn't work. Okay, then you have a plan for like it's like a month's process typically transitioning, right? And this was like a thing it felt like a decision was made kind of like overnight almost, and then they just like acted on it. And so part of me
I
is
mean,
like,
sorry, it's 100% overnight, right? Like they
yeah,
didn't even the next CEO didn't even know who who was going to take over. They had to find another CEO, and so it was like 24-hour decision.
but I feel like there's two things that kind of like suggest that this happened is that like it could be that the board like did what they were supposed to do, and there was just some bombshell of a thing that happened, and they were like, we have to do it right now, which it's like hard to believe what that is, but like that's a thing that could possibly happen, right? Or the other kind of explanation is just like they just acted really kind of like rashly, and it's kind of hard to be like both of those seem unlikely to me on some level, but like the outcome is suggests that one of these two things kind of like happens. And so I don't know, it's just like so it's like very kind of like weird. Maybe moving over to the part of Brian and I we pulled some of our favorite conspiracy theories because again nobody knows what happened, and so there's a lot of stuff flying around about kind of like what happens. And so Brian, maybe I'll throw some of these out here and we can kind of like talk about it. The conspiracy theory that I liked best was that they actually figured out AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, which is like the holy grail of kind of like AI. And one conspiracy theory is, I think OpenAI's kind of stated thing is they want to get to AGI. Maybe they figured out AGI. Sam and the team figured out AGI, and they didn't tell the board because they were worried that the board would kind of like, I don't know, slow it down and all of this kind of stuff. And so the board found out that they figured out AGI and then basically kicked out Sam because of it. Bima, reactions to this conspiracy theory?
Uh,
How likely do you think this is the case?
I mean,
Maybe we'll just play the
probably.
probability game. Like, give a probability for how likely this is the case?
I feel like pretty low probability given how quickly they reacted, right? Like
Mhm.
if they actually figured out some breakthrough, it wouldn't be like immediate dismissal. It would be, I don't know, let's talk about the implications or something. So a little bit
Uh,
less likely.
Okay, do you have a percentage?
I don't know, 15.
15. Okay. I put this at like 1%, and I put this at 1% because I'm like, AGI has been the holy grail for such a long time. Like, I don't know about you, Bima, but like, just technically, all of the like AI people that I know, we're like still so far from this. Um, even after kind of like ChatGPT and like all of that kind of stuff. And so I just feel like if they figured out AGI, that would be such a giant leap forward. But I feel like technically kind of like unlikely. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't know. Just technically, I'm like, this is unlikely the case. Um,
All right, you want my favorite
yeah, please. What's your favorite one? What's your favorite
um
conspiracy theory?
okay, my favorite conspiracy theory is literally the first thought I had when I heard Sam's news, and I saw a couple of folks in my group
Yeah.
kind of like refer to it, which is, as you guys all know, Xi, the Chinese president, came to SF and had the had the meeting with Biden, right, like on
Yeah.
the same day,
Yeah.
and they shut down all of SF. SF is like really clean. They met at this like beautiful home, I think in
Yeah.
San Mateo, and Sam's thing was like literally the day after, right? And so from a pure timing perspective, the first theory was OpenAI was leaking something to China. Um, NSA probably caught wind of it, told the board, and board had to fire him. Very, very. It could have been very likely, right? Because you have to take drastic action on kind of like national security things, and
I
so
I mean
yeah,
that would explain how quickly they moved, right? Because that's like a no questions. Like you don't need to ask any questions. You just got to like make a move right now. That kind of stuff, right?
yeah.
Wait, sorry. Be about to dig into this conspiracy theory. You think that Sam Altman? And again, this is
Okay,
conspiracy.
okay, okay. I literally have the
Yeah.
snippet here.
Okay.
So again, like who knows, right?
Yeah.
But like underlying cause of Sam's removal was due to his ties to a Chinese cyber army group known as D2, Double Dragon. OpenAI had been using their data to train their AI models, including GPT-4. Data
Yeah.
was obtained through hidden business contracts. A company called Whitefly, which was based in Singapore. There you go. There's your Singapore tie.
There you go.
Uh, this D2 group was the largest and biggest crawling and scanning the capacity of the world. Something. Okay. So basically, they were using kind of like other data, training models, and then maybe feeding back information to, I don't know, someone else.
Yeah.
So yeah, if it was flagged as a national security risk, I could see a
That
firing
would explain why
happening.
they're kind of
Yeah,
all moving. But I think, and by the way, for kind of everybody listening, Brian and I are kind of having a bit of fun with kind of conspiracy theories and this kind of stuff. But like for example, Bima, this one for me, I'm kind of like, why does OpenAI need to be involved in the Chinese hacker group, and why does Sam care about this? And then part
I
of
mean
me is like,
it's
if
data, right? Like you want significant amounts of data, but I don't know if you need to take it from like a I don't
yeah,
know.
exactly, right.
Yeah,
And also part of me is like, if this was true, I don't think Microsoft would hire Sam. Like, I feel like Microsoft was like, "Whoa, we got to stay away from this," right? And they definitely wouldn't be like, "I do." Like Ilya posted this thing about how he regrets it or whatever, and all that kind of stuff. Like he wouldn't regret it, right? Like so, I don't know. This one,
true, true, true.
although fun, like doesn't kind of match the like evidence of kind of like what's
Yeah,
happening,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
What made you think about this? You were just like, all of these things are happening at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in SF, right? Like the Biden meeting was a really big deal,
It's a
and
big deal,
so
huge deal.
almost immediately, like on the next day,
Yeah,
Sam gets fired. So
yeah.
uh, one of the most like logical
Okay, percent
reasons.
probability you think this is true.
I mean, probably like 99%. I don't know. I don't
This
know.
is definitely
Very
happening.
low, probably low. I'm gonna go 15 again.
Okay, I'm going like -2%. I'm just like, this is definitely not true. Okay, there was another conspiracy theory here. Sam planned this ahead of time. Sam planned this all along to get out of nonprofit restrictions. So, um, let me kind of set this up for people. Sam realized that this board structure was just like, I mean, sorry, this whole entity structure and boards was like kind of just messed up. He probably saw the writing on the wall that the nonprofit was going to slow down the progress of OpenAI and their technologies and all that. We can have that discussion later, whether that's good or bad, but I think he's in the camp of like, we should go faster. And so this was like a contingency plan for him to like, at some point, he was going to push the button, get fired, and then this is a way for him to get out of the nonprofit restrictions. Two ways he gets out of them. One, he goes and starts another company. Basically, he brings all the engineers, can create whatever structure he wants. The second one is he gets fired. All the employees, basically what's happening now, all the employees want to kind of work with him, and he gets hired back at OpenAI and changes all of the board and stuff. But in either case, he is working at a company with kind of like without any of these nonprofit restrictions. And so one of the conspiracy theories is just that this was one of Sam's plans. He pushed the button. This is all happening according to plan. Bima, reactions to this one?
Dude, I just think that would be such a good movie.
You think the Netflix
Like,
movie's coming? Like
yeah,
who has gone to Hollywood and being like, I got the inside story?
the premise of the movie of like the super nefarious and like clever Sam
Yeah.
to like put all this together is I would 100% watch it.
I feel like Hollywood does want this kind of stuff. Like I'm sure there's an SBF movie getting made, right? There's got to be some SBF like TV show being made.
That
And
one's gonna be different though. That one's just gonna be him sitting in there and be like, "No, I don't recall.
yeah,
I
just
don't know."
lots of fraud.
It's like,
Just
I don't
lots of fraud. But I feel like Hollywood does like these kinds of characters, right? It's like they paint Mark Zuckerberg in a certain way, and SBF is kind of
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
way.
yeah,
Like Sam is kind of eccentric in some ways too, like
yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yes, movie coming soon. What is your take on this, Bima? You think this is like when you read this, you were like maybe could happen, maybe could not happen?
I mean, definitely couldn't happen, right? Like, I think Sam was in YC leading it while I was in
Yeah,
YC, right? And so multiple interactions with Sam. Um, Sam is amazing, very ambitious, but not like pre-planning ahead in
yeah,
an evil
yeah.
way. And so, yeah, negative two. Uh, yeah,
I don't
likely.
even want as somebody who majored in math and statistics. I said negative percentages for probabilities. I don't even know what they mean. What that means now. Yeah, I'm like 0% chance this is kind of like the case of kind of like what happened. I think a really strange part of this story is like I think it's easy for people to be like, oh, this was some power struggle or some ego got involved and all of that kind of stuff. But like you've interacted with kind of Sam. Like I've kind of, I know lots of people kind of like know Sam, and like we look at the people who are kind of involved with this, I don't find anybody who really is kind of like high ego or kind of like is craving power. Like I feel like that's a
Yeah.
story that often happens with these kinds of things, but like I just don't get any whiff of that with any of the people involved here. Like, do you?
Yeah, no. And
Like
again, like
nobody's
we're not.
nefarious. Nobody is like
Yeah,
cunning like
nobody's
this.
nefarious, nobody's
Yeah.
being evil, nobody's kind of like cunning. I mean, I think it really comes down to what is an issue with a lot of companies, especially with their kind of like structure, which is if you take kind of like the average startup, I think the debate is how much do you grow and how much do you like when do you monetize?
Mhm. Mhm.
And Sam's kind of like in the position of we need to get it into people's hands. We need to monetize quickly because kind of like you're taught this, right? In kind of like YC startup land, where if people are willing to pay you, it creates value. And probably on the nonprofit side, they're like, no. Like we want to keep on doing research and we want to do, I don't know, actually get to AGI, etc. And so I think people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. It was just kind of like a very poorly planned kind of like
Yeah.
board announcement transition. Yeah.
This would not be in the Hollywood movie, but like there is a version of this that is exactly what you're saying, which is like this is actually not that. It's weird because of how it was kind of implemented in the stakes, but it's not that weird in the sense that it's kind of a differing opinion of company vision, which is like happens at all startups all the time, where it's like one group thinks the company should be going in this direction, another group thinks it's happening in this direction, and it's just the only kind of weird part about it is just like how rash the decision was made and kind of the fallout as a result of that. But like in the like least most boring version of the story, that's all it really is. It's just like people had competing visions of what the company should do, and then it just kind of like spun out of control, right? But actually, if we take that, that's not really a conspiracy theory, but like, do you think that's the most likely case of like
I
what
mean,
probably happened?
I think so, right? Because
I
it's
think
like
so too.
if you look at what they said, there. I forget who said this. Ilya said they were just like, "Hey, we weren't communicated,"
Yeah,
or sorry, Sam wasn't communicating well. I could totally see that, right? Because it's like when you're CEO of a company, there's a million things happening. You have to pick the right things that you're communicating to the board that are important
yeah.
and different values, right? In terms of kind of like what's important, what's not. And so Sam was probably like launching things left and right, and board doesn't know about it, and communication kind of like broke down. And so could totally see this happening.
I actually think that's the most likely scenario for me in terms of like what actually kind of like happened was just that like it was a differing opinion. It's probably been bubbling for a long time. Like Sam has been like Sam has probably been pushing this direction for a while. The board hasn't been. Sam said something like, okay, I'll do a better job of keeping you guys in the loop. Didn't
Yeah.
happen. Things were moving fast or whatever. And then I don't know, maybe the board just kind of like made this decision to kind of move. Again, rash. And I think, probably should have kind of like had more thought it through and had more plans to kind of like make the switch and do it with Sam or something like that. But
Yeah, don't do it the day after the U.S. China
oh my gosh.
meeting.
And then just randomly, just like over the weekend, just like waffling back and forth. But that's a likely kind of thing because Avilia is kind of posting regret. Like, I don't think anybody in the board thought it was going to, this is all the stuff that was going to happen, right? I don't think any of the people make this decision and think it's going to like turn into this whole kind of like thing. So to me, kind of, that's actually probably the most likely scenario. It's the least interesting of our conspiracy theories, but most likely to me. Okay. We're kind of touching on it a little bit, but I think now there's this debate about whether AI should slow down or speed up, specifically kind of OpenAI. And then I think probably you and I, if we're going to bet money on it, most likely scenario of kind of why this all happened was probably because they had a disagreement about whether it kind of should slow down, kind of speed up. Emmett, who is now the interim CEO, made this post as part of kind of joining OpenAI, saying that I think somebody asked him, hey, are you like pro speed up? Are you like pro kind of like slow down? And he basically said, if you think about kind of like, I don't know, a vehicle moving at 10 miles an hour, I don't think it should be 0 miles an hour, but I think it's like 1 to 2. So I think he's in the like in the scale of how fast they should be moving. He's kind of in the 1 to 2 bucket, at least for now, right? Like, let's not read into kind of too much into a tweet. I think he probably wants to come in and be cautious and then kind of like figure out where to kind of go from there is my read of kind of that. And so, Bima, what do you think about kind of like, are you more in the Sam, like we should hit the gas as far as possible? Are you in the like, we should pull over and park in the parking lot and have a conversation about this? Or are you like more like Emmett, which is like, hey, we should kind of probably take this kind of like slow and see where we are?
I think we're definitely okay if we're going to use the number rating,
Yeah,
right? Like Sam is definitely 10. Knowing him,
Sam is
like 10 or maybe 11 or 12. Just like very,
Sam,
very far extreme.
Sam is at 10 and then is talking to the engineers about how do we move the speedometer so we can get to like 15, right? Like he's in that camp.
Yeah. And we also kind of like are in the Emmett circle a little bit.
Yeah.
Emmett's not at 1 or 2. I think he's just saying 1 or 2, right? But like
100%.
what he's really trying to say is it's not 10, 11, 12. We need to pull it back a little bit, which I think I agree with. And I don't know. The thing that kind of like occurs to me, right, is with a lot of new things, both you need kind of like parallel tracking on regulation and kind of like development. I think Coinbase actually did a great job of this, kind of like engaging with the regulators for crypto. Airbnb kind of did this much later on. Typically in kind of like startup development, the first like, I mean, OpenAI has been around for a long time, but like the first like 3 years, you're kind of like, who cares, right? And you're like, nobody even knows who you are. Nothing ever happens.
We don't know if anything's gonna work. Like, who cares?
Yeah, nothing's gonna work. Your company's probably gonna 99% die, and so not until you're kind of like somebody does kind of like regulations start, right? And so it's already behind, which means they're like really at companies there needs to be this shift to engaging with regulations. I think I don't know, maybe OpenAI didn't do that as strongly as they should, and so I don't know. I'm with Emmett, needs to pull back, but not to 1 or 2.
I feel like with the thing about kind of like regulations and stuff too, I think the thing that's tricky, OpenAI I think is in a tricky place, similar to kind of like Coinbase, which I think like Brian Armstrong at Coinbase kind of did like a really good job of this. Like we go into this debate about whether companies should kind of like be self-regulating or that should be the government's job. And then I think for AI specifically, waiting for the government to kind of regulate it is just like tricky because the government is quite slow, and based off of kind of Biden's latest executive order, they kind of don't understand the technology well. And so OpenAI is in this weird place where it's like, okay, so are we responsible? Or like, isn't this a thing the government should do? But we can't really wait for the government because they're like, well, like nothing will happen then. So like, what do we kind of like do? And so I think it's like, it puts companies in kind of a tricky place on like how to kind of like kind of regulate, because look, most companies, like, I mean, companies that you and I started, it's like, we're trying to go as fast as we possibly can. Now, OpenAI is different because I think the technology is kind of like so kind of revolutionary and kind of like far reaching. But like typical companies is like we go as fast as we possibly can, right? Like government, let us know if we're kind of endangering people or something like that. But you kind of try to go fast. That's the typical kind of like stance, right? Um, I'm kind of with you. I feel like, and again, I think Brian, you and I have kind of like we kind of have cursory kind of like involvement with kind of, not involvement, like we know people who know Emmett. We have people who are quite close to Emmett. Emmett kind of like grew up in Seattle. We kind of like went to college in Seattle, and so we are a little bit closer to Emmett than maybe kind of Sam. And by the way, by all means, we don't know Emmett well. We don't know. We're like, I wouldn't call myself friends with Emmett or anything like that. But I think my kind of impression of Emmett from kind of people who've been around him and then kind of just like, I don't know, cursory kind of interactions with him is that Emmett seems quite considered, I think. And I feel like he's like he's a good CEO. And I think kind of through the whole Twitch things, like, so I think he's good at all of this stuff. And so I think he's taking a measured approach to this. But I think around kind of Silicon Valley circles and stuff, Emmett is thought of in pretty high regard, right? And so I think he's like a cool head, quite responsible, will communicate well. And so I think actually, I don't know what's going to happen, but actually, I think a good choice for this, based on kind of like my impressions of him and that kind of stuff. But I think he's taking the right stance, which is like, hey, let's start at a 1 and 2. I got to like get in there and figure out what's going on, and then like we can kind of ratchet it up after that. But I think I mean, nobody would ever ask me, but like if I was taking the OpenAI job, I would probably do what Emmett is doing, start slow and kind of go forward. By the way, if the board
So you
wants
can
to go slower,
Emmett's interim, so you could still the position's still
okay,
open.
great. Yeah, they should take me over Emmett. But also, if you want the job, like the board basically probably let Sam go because he was going too fast, and so like zero, you can't go in there being like, I'm going to go as fast as Sam, right? Like you immediately failed the interview. Um, okay, maybe last part here. What do we think kind of happens now from here? So again,
Oh
as far as
man.
we know now, Emmett is CEO. Seems like Sam is going to Microsoft again, but maybe not. A bunch of the engineers could go over to Microsoft. So as far as we know now, there is going to be like two companies almost. And there's going to be like advanced research at Microsoft, and then there's going to be OpenAI run by kind of Emmett. What do you think kind of like happens now, Beamer? You have any different
I'll give
guesses?
you my I'll give
Yeah.
you my thing, and you can do yours.
Okay.
Um, I think the most likely scenario is um, there's a for-profit and there's a non-profit
Oh, they're like
company,
split
basically.
OpenAI into like nonprofit and
I,
for
I
profit.
don't I don't know. Okay, so the end state, right? End state of what this looks like is there's probably something that's like for profit, and then
Yeah.
there's something that's like nonprofit. I think they're different entities.
Yeah.
So maybe OpenAI becomes the nonprofit one, and then Microsoft's weird. And honestly, it's just kind of like a staging environment right now,
Yeah.
right?
So
For
weird.
them to like figure out. Maybe it'll spin out something, but I think the question for me is who ends up becoming the actual for-profit
Yeah.
OpenAI entity that kind of like eventually exists. It would be hard. I think it would be hard for them to like um, get OpenAI back to kind of like its former glory
Yeah.
for-profit state,
Yeah.
right? Uh, and it's much easier for I uh, I think there's going to be two
Okay. So
camps.
you
It's
think
going to
there's
be
no
the
going
like
back?
yeah, I think it's
There's no
good.
going
I
back.
think there's no going back. There's going to
Okay.
be the like Sam 12, right? Kind of like
Yeah.
mode,
Company.
and there's going to be the like Emmett or whoever ends up kind of like really leading OpenAI. The kind
Yeah.
of like let's go at like 6, 7, or 8, and then we're going to watch for the next like 4 or 5 years to see which one wins. Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I'm gonna take Coinbase as an example again, right? Like Coinbase is there were like a million other brokerages,
Tons.
right? And
Still
then
are.
they were all, yeah, all competing with each other. The ones that didn't work with the regulators kind of like died.
Yeah.
Coinbase is still around, so the same things can like happen. I think.
Part of me is kind of like, what? Let's say that let's say that think about it in the two party system where there's like two kind of like entities here. Part of me is thinking like, what? I know what Sam's going to do. right? Like I know what that entity is going to be like. I wonder what the nonprofit version of that is going to be. Is like, okay, they're just making their own models. They're trying to be kind of more responsible about it. And Sam is like kind of just like the cowboy, like pirate, just like doing kind of like stuff. And I'm just trying to kind of think about like, what are these two entities going to do? And I guess in that case, OpenAI goes back to its kind of original roots where it's more of a nonprofit and it's trying to build like an open AI model for like everybody and it's like open source and everybody can kind of see it, right? And
I think
then
so. It's going to go back to like research, right?
it's
Like,
going to go back to that research.
where does research money come from? A lot of grants.
You think Elon comes back? Elon's like, great, this is the OpenAI I
Yeah,
wanted for.
maybe Elon goes back.
Yeah.
Uh,
You think
Elon's
Elon
already
is
working on
called?
this.
You think Elon is called the board and be like, you have seen the light. I will come back.
Totally could see that happening.
I mean, actually, it would be kind of good for OpenAI because look, they're like hemorrhaging engineers, and if there's anybody who can like hire engineers, like Elon's
Yeah.
pretty good at hiring engineers, so like maybe that's
Yeah,
the move.
yeah. That could totally be the move. I don't think the Microsoft Lab thing is going to stay for a long time
Oh,
either. Like, I think it's going to spin. Yeah, it's going to spin out, right? And they're going to do something. And
that's
yeah,
that's the only thing I'll add here. That's the only thing I'll kind of like say here. Like the two-party system, I think is likely. It's hard for me to kind of believe it's going to kind of like go back. Like if they go back to OpenAI, it's like you are completely gutting the board. Like that's not going to happen. Like what do you do with kind of like Emmett? And by the way, for people's context, Emmett and Sam are friends. They were in the first batch of YC together. They have known each other for a long time, right? So there's like, Beam, I don't know how close they actually are, but like there's got to be some level of personal relationship there, right? Like, they have
I
each
don't know
other's
if they're
phone numbers and
friends,
stuff.
but they, yeah.
Yeah, I mean
They're in the same. They're cohort.
yeah,
They're cohort batchmates. They're
they've
batchmates.
and yeah, they've met tons of times and all of that kind of stuff, right? So I've never heard of a like sour relationship there. I don't know why there would be, like, but the Microsoft thing makes no sense to me. Like, I don't think. I don't think they want to work within Microsoft structure. I don't think they want to kind of do any of this stuff. I don't think they want to like take orders from Microsoft. I don't think they want to do any of that stuff. I saw somebody had a tweet that I thought was interesting. Microsoft doesn't want them as part of Microsoft because, again,
What?
like, and the reason for this is because, like, for legal and liability stuff, like Microsoft would rather be an investor in the entity, but not actually have it as
Yeah.
Microsoft corporate, right? Like, because then anything they do, like Microsoft is then like liable, right? And so somebody was basically saying the call option on OpenAI was more valuable than like actually owning, kind of like being part of it. And so
Yeah.
I think
100%.
that's also kind of another piece, like, there. Okay, last thing here. Do you think everything that has happened, you think is good or bad for Microsoft? If you're Satya, are you just like,
Oh, dude.
this is great, or are you just like, what are you guys doing?
No, I think it's terrible. Right? Like they actually, I felt like they actually made a great move investing in OpenAI, right? Like trying to integrate it into search engine, everything kind of like Microsoft does.
Yeah,
And so I think they made a great move. And then they were probably like as shocked as all of us were, even
yeah,
more, right? When
yeah.
they kind of like threw OpenAI into, I don't know, this fiasco. So definitely not like a good move.
Yeah, a lot of people are kind of being like, "Oh man, Satya is like amazing. He like played this whole thing kind of like super well or whatever." I'm with you. I feel like if I'm Satya, I'm like, dude, what the hell? Like,
Yeah. I think he played the call option well. The kind of like, hey, let's have a landing place for yeah.
I think he's done as well as you possibly can with kind of like the cards that he was kind of dealt. But like, I think internally he's probably just like pissed. He's like, what are you guys doing? Right? Like, I think his position was better before all of this happened than it is kind of like now, but he kind of recouped as much value as he could for kind of like what it is. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
I don't think he's happy about the situation, but he's done the best that he can, which
Yeah.
is kind of amazing for him.
Maybe unpopular opinion. I think the whole fiasco is a good thing for AI.
Oh,
Because I mean, two things. One is now there's kind of like multi
yeah,
camps, right, working on with different approaches, working on the same thing. Hopefully,
yeah.
that
With
have
different
like smart
philosophies of how it
people.
should be done, that's good,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So kind of like all competition, I think, is like generally good. And then I think the other thing is this like nonprofit for profit thing was tested, and so we now kind of like have a better understanding of how AI should be governed. Kind of like also kind of like the call for regulation is should be like stronger now, and so I don't know. I think overall, generally good for AI.
Maybe one kind of positive note out of all of this too is that people probably kind of like how boards work and board of directors and all of that stuff. People are probably like, there's probably more people who have learned more about it in the last kind of like 4 days than kind of previously. And so I think for founders who are starting companies out there and stuff, it's like, it's good to kind of like pay attention to this. Boards are not just kind of for show. And so
Yeah.
there's probably
Yeah.
like a
Boards
part of that.
boards matter when you're doing very well or very poorly.
Yes. Yes. All right. I think that's it. I think we covered everything. Let's see. What is my recap for this? This is a very weird story. So much so that Brian and I just decided to record an episode on it. It's a lot is changing right now. I think our take with it is that the board probably acted rashly. I think it's probably a fair take, and kind of like there's been a lot of kind of blowback and unplanned stuff for this. We don't think that they figured out AGI. We also don't think that there's a secret deal with Chinese hackers, and
Some of us
we
still think that. Some of us still think
okay.
that.
Some of us still think that, namely Brian, and we don't think that Sam had this kind of planned along. I think our most likely take here is that look, it was the differing opinions of what the company vision should be, and then the board just kind of acted kind of very quickly to kind of like sever ties on it, probably more quickly than they maybe should have. You and I are both in kind of Emmett's camp where we're like, yeah, you should probably take it a bit slower and kind of see where you are. We're not in Sam's kind of like go to 12 camp. And I think what happens now is I think we both think that there's probably two entities now. There's probably no going back, but you and I would probably bet money that Sam is not going to stay at Microsoft, right? He's not going to be part of the advanced research there. So yeah, I think that's
And Elon's coming back. Let's not.
Elon's coming back. That's the thing you should take away from this. Elon's coming back to OpenAI. That would be kind of fun. That would make the Hollywood movie even better. So
So good.
that's what we're here for. All right, cool. Thanks, everybody.